Life has a strange way of testing our hearts, giving us a fragile opportunity, then asking if we're brave enough to hold on to it. Will CEO Toan recognize the chance, or will he let me slip away forever? When I was lost, alone, and broken at a quiet roadside, it wasn't fate that found me, but a mysterious woman whose kindness helped me survive. Her identity remains hidden, yet her heart saved mine. And now, with just a few quiet words, CEO Toan's sister has opened up a truth so tender, so raw. It brought tears to everyone listening. The rain poured heavily that morning, as if the sky was carrying the sorrow of someone's broken heart. At a quiet roadside stop, hidden behind the fog of an early dawn, a woman sat trembling under a thin blanket. Her clothes were soaked, her eyes distant. No one knew who she was, where she came from, or how long she had been there. But one thing was clear: she was lost, in more ways than one. The locals whispered about a kind older woman who had found her days ago. She brought warm soup, dry clothes, and quiet comfort. She asked no questions, only gave what she could. And in that fragile silence, the lost woman began to find strength again. Back in the city, CEO Toan couldn't sleep. Since the day she disappeared, he had searched endlessly. Every street corner, every village road, every hospital and shelter, he searched with the desperation of someone who had tasted love, only to lose it in a single breath. His world no longer made sense without her presence. People around him noticed the change. He smiled less, worked more, and stared at her photo for hours. Then one evening, Toan's younger sister, normally cheerful and quiet, stood up during a family dinner, holding back tears. "I know who she is," she said. "I saw her once at the market near the old bus stop. She looked so lost, so thin. I didn't know what to do. I tried to help her, but she was too afraid to speak." Her voice cracked. "I should have done more. I didn't know it was her to Diem." The room fell silent. His mother wept. Toan stood frozen. Hope, the kind that both heals and hurts, surged through him like fire. Without waiting for another word, he rushed out into the night, chasing the smallest thread of fate at the bus stop. Only the wind answered him. But just beyond the hill, a familiar voice whispered a song, broken, trembling, but unmistakably hers. And there she was, sitting in the yard of a small countryside house, wrapped in a worn sweater. Her eyes met his, shock, disbelief. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She hadn't forgotten him. Toan didn't speak. He knelt down beside her and gently held her hand. "I've been looking for you," he whispered, "every second, every breath." The woman who had cared for her smiled gently from the door, knowing that some hearts are bound to return to each other, no matter how far they drift. Because sometimes, a fragile opportunity is all life gives us to fix what was broken. And in that moment, Toan knew he would not waste it, not this time. "Hi, Jack." The air was thick with emotion, too sacred for words. To Diem's lips parted slightly, but her voice was lost in the flood of memories rushing back of the forest, the hospital bed, the warmth of Toan's hand when she was at her weakest. She had tried to forget. She thought disappearing was the right thing to do. She believed she didn't belong in his world. But now, he was here. Toan sat beside her in the quiet of the countryside yard, not letting go of her hand. "You disappeared without a word," he said softly, his voice shaking. "I searched everywhere, thinking the worst. Every day, I feared I was too late." To Diem lowered her gaze. "I didn't want to be a burden," she murmured. "Your world, it's full of light, of purpose. I didn't think I had the right to stand beside you." Toan's heart ached. He gently tilted her chin so she would look at him. "Tu Diem, you saved my life. But more than that, you gave it meaning. I don't care where you came from. I only care where we go from here together." A soft breeze stirred the leaves around them. The older woman, who had watched over Tu Diem like a silent guardian, stepped forward. "She has suffered, but she has not given up," she said quietly. "What she needs now is not rescue, but someone who believes in her." Toan nodded, his eyes never leaving Tu Diem's. "Then let me be that someone," for a long moment. Nothing was said. Tu Diem's fingers tightened around his. The fear hadn't completely left her, but something stronger was growing in its place. Trust. That evening, under the stars, Toan brought her a warm coat and a promise. "Come home with me," he said. "Let's build a life, not a fairy tale, something real, even if it's not perfect." Tu Diem looked at the path behind her, the loneliness, the running, the silence. Then she looked at the path ahead, unfamiliar, uncertain, but filled with possibility. And she nodded because sometimes love doesn't shout or shine. It waits quiet, patient, and unwavering. And when fate gives you a second chance, you take it. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the hills, casting golden light across the quiet village where Tu Diem had been hiding for weeks. For the first time in a long time, she woke up without the heavy weight of fear on her chest. Outside, birds chirped softly, and the scent of boiling porridge drifted in from the kitchen. Toan had stayed the night not in the same room, of course, but nearby just to make sure she felt safe. Tu Diem walked out to the garden barefoot, dew clinging to her feet, her heart still unsure if what had happened the night before had been real. And there he was, Toan, helping the old woman sweep fallen leaves without any hesitation. Sleeves rolled up, smile humble, the image struck her. This was not the CEO that graced glossy business magazines or commanded attention in boardrooms. This was a man willing to chase her into silence and shadows, to wait until she was ready. "You're up," he said when he saw her, his face lighting up in a way that made her pulse skip. "I hope I didn't scare the chickens this morning. They seem to hate me." Tu Diem laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. "You're not exactly farm material," she teased gently, but there was warmth in her voice. Toan walked toward her and held out a small wildflower. "It's not roses or orchids, but I thought you'd like this better." She accepted the flower slowly, eyes misting. "Why do you do all this for me?" Toan didn't hesitate. "Because when I was at my lowest, you didn't ask who I was. You just helped. You saw me, not the position, not the wealth, just me. I've never forgotten that." There was silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Later that day, Toan's sister, Lynn, arrived with a driver and supplies. She hugged Tu Diem tightly, tears pooling in her eyes. "You don't know how much he missed you," she whispered. "He was never the same. Every night, he would replay every word you said, every place you could have gone." Tu Diem's heart softened further. During the farewell meal, the elderly woman who had protected Tu Diem spoke gently. "Don't fear the world beyond this village, child. If someone is willing to walk into the unknown for you, don't make them walk alone." Tu Diem looked at Toan. His hand was resting on the table, open, waiting. She reached out and placed hers in his. No more running. This time, she would walk forward fragile, afraid, but not alone. Because love like this doesn't knock twice, and she was finally ready to open the door. They left the village just as the sky was blushing with twilight, the wind soft and cool against their faces. Tu Diem sat quietly beside Toan in the back seat of the car, holding a small cloth bag of things the old woman had packed for her: some herbs, a homemade scarf, and a tiny wooden bird carved as a symbol of freedom. Toan didn't speak much on the ride. He didn't need to. His presence was calm, respectful, and full of meaning. Every now and then, he glanced at her, not to rush her, not to demand answers, but simply to remind her, "I'm here, and I'm staying." When they arrived at his family's home, it was Lynn who opened the door with open arms. "Welcome home," she whispered as she hugged Tu Diem tightly. "No matter where you've been or what's happened, you belong here now." Toan's mother appeared shortly after, and to everyone's surprise, her eyes softened the moment she saw Tu Diem. Without a word, she took Tu Diem's hand in hers and led her inside. That night, Toan prepared a quiet dinner. Nothing fancy, just a warm soup, some rice, and steamed vegetables. But to Tu Diem, it tasted like healing, like hope, like home. After dinner, they sat on the balcony together under the stars. The city lights sparkled far in the distance, but up here, it was peaceful. Tu Diem turned to him, her voice soft. "I don't know what the future holds." Toan looked at her gently. "Neither do I, but I know I want to face it with you." She hesitated, then leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to be afraid that I was too broken, that I was just a burden." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You were never a burden. You're a blessing I almost lost." A long silence passed. Then, she whispered, "I'm not ready for forever yet, but maybe I'm ready to try." Toan smiled, and his voice was a quiet promise. "Trying is enough. I'll be here every step of the way." Above them, a shooting star traced the sky, brief, beautiful, full of possibility. Tu Diem looked up and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she made a wish, not for escape, but for the courage to stay. Because sometimes love doesn't ask for perfection. It just asks for a chance. Life lesson from the story: a fragile opportunity. The story of Tu Diem and Toan teaches us a powerful lesson about love, healing, and second chances. Sometimes life leads us through pain, loss, and uncertainty, not to break us, but to prepare us for something greater. Tu Diem's journey was not only about survival, but about finding her voice, her strength, and the courage to open her heart again after being deeply wounded.